Hi.
Hi.
There you go. Um, what a lovely group. I'm so happy and thrilled to be here with Dani. I was thinking on the way over that one of the best perks about being an author, aside from the years that you make no money and the constant self-loathing, is
That's a perk.
no, but seriously, this really is such a thrill to be able to sit here and talk to a writer I admire so much about a book that I absolutely adore. I don't know how many of you have read it, but if you haven't, you are in for a huge treat. And I'm just so delighted to be here to be able to ask you all my questions, but I'll try to leave room for audience questions too. So,
Well, I just want to say I'm thrilled to be back at Boswell and just among you all and in person. And it's I'm almost giddy when I'm in front of audiences now because
no, it's weird.
It's been so long. Yeah,
Would you like to start out by reading
sure.
from your novel?
Thank you. You all can hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to read from the very opening. As Daniel mentioned, it does start kind of with a bang, but it does not remotely keep up this pace. It starts with this accident, and the novel is very much about aftermaths and consequences. And so this is August 27th, 1985. Sarah and Theo. And it's nothing, really, or might be nothing, or ought to be nothing, as he leans his head forward to press the tip of his cigarette to the car's lighter. It sizzles on contact, a sound particular to its brief moment in history in which cars have lighters and otherwise sensible 15-year-olds choke down Marlboro Reds and drive their mothers' Buicks without so much as a learner's permit. There's a girl he wants to impress. Her name is Misty Zimmerman, and if she lives through this night, she will grow up to be a magazine editor or a high school teacher or a defense lawyer. She will be a mother of 3 or remain childless. She will die young of ovarian cancer or live to know her great-grandchildren. But these are only a few possible arcs to a life, a handful of shooting stars in the night sky. Change one thing, and everything changes. A tremor here sets off an earthquake there, a fault line deepens, a wire gets tripped. His foot on the gas. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but that won't stop him. He's all jacked up, just like a 15-year-old boy. He has something to prove, to himself, to Misty, to his sister. It's as if he's following a script written in Braille, his fingers running across code he doesn't understand. Theo, slow down. That's his sister Sarah from the back seat. Misty's riding shotgun. It was Sarah who tossed him the keys to their mom's car. Sarah, age 17. After this night, she will become unknowable to him. The summer sky is a veil thrown over the moon and stars. The streets are quiet, the good people of Avalon long since tucked in for the night. Their own parents are asleep in their queen-size bed under the plaid afghan knitted by one of their father's patients. His mom is a deep sleeper, but his dad has been trained by a lifetime as a doctor to bolt awake at the slightest provocation. He is always ready. The teenagers aren't looking for trouble. They're good kids. Everyone would say so. But they're bored. It's the end of summer. School will resume next week. Sarah is going into her senior year, after which she'll be gone. She's a superstar, his sister, varsity this, honors that, bristling with potential. Theo has 3 years left, and he's barely made a mark. He's a chubby kid whose default is silence and shame. He blushes easily. He can feel his cheeks redden as he holds the lighter and inhales, hears the sizzle, draws smoke deep into his lungs. His father, a pulmonary surgeon, would kill him. Maybe that's why Sarah threw him the keys. Maybe she's trying to help, to get him to act, goddammit, to take a risk. Better to be bad than to be nothing. Misty Zimmerman is just a girl along for the ride. It was Sarah who asked her to come. Sarah doing for Theo what Theo cannot do for himself. Change one thing and everything changes. The Buick speeds down Poplar Street. Misty stretches and yawns in the passenger street. Theo turns left, then right. He's getting the hang of this. He flicks the directional, then heads onto the parkway. As they pass the mall, he looks to see if Burger King is still open. Watch it, Sarah yells. He swerves back into his lane, heart racing. He almost hit the guardrail. He gets off the parkway at the next exit and eases up on the gas. This was maybe a bad idea. He wants to go home. He also wants another cigarette. Pull over, Sarah says. I'll drive. Theo looks for a good spot to stop. He has no idea how to park. Sarah's right. This is stupid. Actually, no, forget it. I shouldn't, she says. They're almost home. Almost home. It's like a song in his head. Almost home, almost home, almost home. Just a few blocks to go. They pass the Heller's house, the Chertoffs. As he leans forward, the lighter slips through Theo's fingers and drops into his open shirt collar. He lets out a yelp and tries to grab it, which only makes matters worse. He arches his back to shake the burning metal thing loose, but it's wedged between his shorts and his belly, the smell of singed flesh. A perfect, shiny half moon will remain, years from now. When a lover traces the scar on his stomach and asks how he got it, he will roll away. But now their futures shoot like gamma rays from the moving car. 3 high school students. What if Sarah had gone out with her friends instead that night? What if Misty had begged off? What if Theo had succumbed to his usual way of being and fixed himself a salami sandwich with lots of mustard and taken it with him to bed? The wheel spins, the screams of teenagers in the night. Theo, no, stop, Jesus, fuck, help, God, and there is no screech of brakes, nothing to blunt the impact. A concussion of metal and an ancient oak, the sound of 2 worlds colliding. The fender and right side of the Buick crumple like it's a toy, and this is all make-believe. Upstairs, on the 2nd floor of Benjamin and Mimi Wilf's home, a light blinks on. A window opens. Ben Wilf stares down at the scene below for a fraction of a second. By the time he's made it to the front door, his daughter Sarah is standing before him. Thank God, thank God, thank God. Her t-shirt and her face splattered with blood. Theo is on all 4s on the ground. He seems to be in one piece. Thank God, thank God, thank God. But then there's a girl in the car, Dad. It doesn't go well.
Yeah, wow. I heard the murmurs. No one will read this book and think, oh, that got off to kind of a slow start. I have so many questions, but I think maybe the one that makes the most sense is to start out with that incident, which is simple in a way and tragic, and a mistake any teenager could make, which you highlight when you call them good kids. And I think it's clear that this could happen to sort of any kids anywhere. And I just wanted to, I wonder sort of what was the genesis of it? Did you imagine this scene and then build the characters around it? Or did the characters come to you first and you sort of felt like you needed to, spark this novel with something as incredibly intense? Or sort of how did this come to you?
It's a great question. And it's a complicated answer because I started this novel, the initial pages, 15 years ago. And I had these characters. I knew them. I began the novel where it opens in the book right after this scene on one particular night in 2010. And I had all of the characters. They were abundantly vivid to me. I loved them. All I wanted to do was write this novel, but I had a fixed idea of how I wanted to structure it, which I would have known this then and said it to students, but I somehow wasn't taking my own advice. There are many ways to start a novel. I mean, there's character, there's a sense of place, there's, something that just sort of shimmers and says this needs to be written about. But structure, I don't think is ever a way to start a novel, or it certainly wasn't in this case. And the structure was going to be that I was going to tell the story backward in time. So I began this book in 2010 on one particular night with these characters. Ben Wilf is an older doctor at that point. Sarah and Theo have already left home. Ben is spending the last night he will ever spend in this house. He's surrounded by boxes, and he's leaving this house that he's raised his family in and lived in longer than any other place in his life. And he looks across the street as this little boy named Waldo, who's 11 years old in 2010. And they form this very unlikely friendship. And I then moved to New Year's Eve of 1999, the Y2K New Year's Eve, in which we all thought we were going to perish. Isn't that adorable? I mean, it's just it's so innocent and quaint to think of it now, of what we were worried about. And the problem with continuing to move backward in time is that I was going to run out of runway for the characters, and I somehow hadn't anticipated that, and I couldn't figure out any other way to tell the story. And so I took these characters that I loved and I put them in a drawer, and I didn't think I would ever come back to it. And 15 years went by, and I wrote a bunch of other books, and I had a lot of life happen in those 15 years. And then at the start of the pandemic, or not at the start, but maybe 8-9 months in, I was cleaning out my office closet, like just really Marie Kondoing like the heck out of it. I'd gotten tired of baking sourdough bread, so this seemed like the next thing to do with my time. I don't know about you, but I was not writing at the start of, like, who could write? And there were these pages, and I discovered them again, and I just sat down and I read them. And the thing that cracked it open for me was, and now it's 2020. And suddenly I thought, oh, I've written these sections that each take place on one night, 10 years apart, 2010 and effectively 2000. And who would these people be now? Who would these characters be? And I had known that something concussive and major happened at the start. Waldo refers to the tree, as all the neighborhood's kids do, as the magic tree. And it horrifies Ben that they call it that. I knew that, but I didn't know exactly what had happened there when I wrote that first 100 pages or so. And so when I found my way back in there, that's exactly where I went. I thought, if I'm going to be able to find my way back into this book and really come to understand who these characters become, I have to know what they're running from and what they're contending with. And that's when I wrote that first passage.
Okay, but it sort of surprises me that you like that structure came to you, or that you started it and you were writing it going back in time, because the structure is so integral to the story. And I don't know, I read, of course, as a writer as well as a reader, so I'm always like, what's her trick? Like what? And one of the things, well, first of all, what a genius first sentence. Starting with I was like, I have a whole paragraph written about first sentence that's starting with and then just cracking, just like throwing open a window on this story, and sort of telling your readers that that you're in the middle of a sentence, you're in the middle of a story with us, and you'll just let us in. You'll just open the window and shine a little light, and wow, we are in it, And I feel like that first sentence is like well, you said runway. It feels like a runway to the rest of the story, and how much you play with structure and time, and how you bend it, and how you circle around and connect it. I just want I don't know. I want you to talk about that, because it was so fascinating to me. And I have every book I start, I say, this one is going to be the one that goes in chronological order. And they never do. Because I don't think we work, I don't think most of our minds don't really work that way, but you talk.
No, exactly. And I love that you love that first sentence, because when I sat down, it was like sort of 15 years of pressure behind me that I felt. And I knew that the first word was and. That didn't come to me later. It was the first word needed to be and. And I had been working with time and upending time and trying to tell stories in which the structure is sort of kaleidoscopic or nonlinear. I also, I agree that our minds don't work that way, and memory doesn't work that way. And, stories tend to sort of, even the stories we tell ourselves kind of loop around, and we're always carrying our past with us, and sort of also possibly carrying our futures, or at least our imagined futures, with us. And I wanted to be able to explore that. And I mean, the irony of having been married to that structure all those years ago is I don't write chronologically either. And what I was doing was trying to create this experimental structure, but hewing to chronology, just backward chronology. I mean, it was a terrible idea. Note to self, I mean, there's a reason why you will not find very many novels that are told backward in time. There are a couple, but for the most part, they just don't work. And I knew that it needed to be cracked open in this way. And I think that the reason why 2020, and there's a very thin layer of 2020 in the book. I didn't want there to be a lot of 2020 in the book. I was sick of 2020 while I was, I didn't want to write a pandemic novel. I was just really interested in almost the idea of like a window shade going up and just having these glimpses that I found really satisfying to write, and that I hoped would be really satisfying to read, of who these characters would become, and choosing really particular moments, particular years, particular nights in their lives in order to be able to really capture the whole of their lives. And also when I realized that I could return to, since I was no longer hewing to any kind of chronology, I could return to that night in 2010. I could return to that night in 1985. And that's when I really understood the structure.
I mean, I always think that the first, like my prime directive is to keep my readers turning pages. And so that means somehow building suspense. So what is admirable, and what you'll just have to find out for yourselves, it's how you manage to keep the suspense when we do sort of know. I mean, this isn't, like we were saying in the back room, this is not the book isn't exactly plot heavy. I mean, there's plenty of plot, but it's not like, it's not, I mean, there are specific events, but we find out about them, relatively early in the story. So I think one of the most impressive things you did was manage to, like, I mean, I never do this, but I was like reading really fast and like skipping ahead and then going back, and like it was really a very suspenseful novel in its chronologically loopy way.
I love that, because I feel like sort of a chronology can really do that in really interesting ways. Yeah. And I really wanted, I mean, plot does not tend to be what I'm most interested in as a writer, but my characters lead me to, I mean, one of my favorite quotes about writing is from Aristotle's Poetics, and it's, action is not plot, but merely the result of pathos. And like, if you have characters, you have pathos. If you have pathos, you have action. That's plot. And, this isn't a novel, and I don't think any of my novels really, or books at all, are about what happens, but why does it happen? How does it happen? What's the results of it happening? Mm-hmm. But the what, like we know in those first opening pages that Sarah and Theo are going to survive, that they're going to grow into adulthood. So it's not, we already know that the shape of their lives is going to be a certain way, but the filling in really of the why and how does life shape them.
Yeah, it's more how than what. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me pivot and ask you about the characters, because they're all so interesting, and so like I really what I really want to ask you about is Shankman, the least sympathetic character, who I was so fascinated by, because I feel like you it was an interesting authorial move, because he's a crappy dad. I mean, and to me that's like an unforgivable sin, and you somehow managed to make him sympathetic. And I don't quite know how you did that, but he cannot sort of love his son properly. And right? I mean, I'm so conscious of like not wanting to give anything away, even though we just talked about that, but he just can't be the man he should be. So how come I'm still like rooting for him?
I really had a lot of compassion for Shankman. He's a terrible dad, but he's a terrible dad because he loves his son so much, and his own insecurity and the ways that he thinks life should be lived make him afraid for his son. Waldo, his son, is not quote unquote normal. He's a dreamer. He's brilliant. He's probably on the spectrum. He's obsessed with the cosmos. All Schenkman wants is for Waldo to be playing Little League and catching the ball, not staring up at the sky. And because Schenkman believes that that's the way toward a successful and contented life, even though he, Schenkman, does not have a successful or contented life, because the way that he views life, well, and I think this is true for all of us in one way or another, but the way he views life means that the life that's reflected back at him is a very sort of negative experience, because he's always waiting to be dissed. He's always waiting he's always comparing himself to other people and finding himself wanting. So as a father, he doesn't know what to do with this special boy. But it's not because he's a terrible person. It's because he's a deeply flawed person. And then ultimately, and this, I don't think this is a spoiler either, but ultimately, I mean, he's the most tragic character, because he comes to understand that he has messed up the one thing in life that you can't mess up and then fix later. And that he and his son are simply not going to really be part of the same orbit, as it were.
One of my best friends is a social worker, and when I have two teenage daughters, and when they were born, I remember her saying, so much of parenting is about how your personality matches this other personality. And I've been thinking about that for 20 years, and that to me, I thought about that when I was reading Schenkman, and his anger, I think, is his tragic flaw. So, I mean, that's all mixed in his inability to see his own son instead of as someone else, rather than just a poor reflection of himself. Yeah. But what about the other characters? Do you, who did you love the best? Like, who was the most challenging for you to write? Like, I don't know, they're all wonderful.
So there are these two families in Signifiers. There's the Wilf family and the Schenkman family. The Wilf family are Ben, Mimi, Theo, and Sarah Wilf. The Schenkmans are Waldo, whose name, by the way, becomes clear why Schenkman would name his son Waldo. A reader asked me that the other night, who wasn't far enough into the book to know the answer. But the Schenkmans live across the street, and they are newer members of this town and of this neighborhood. I was very interested in what it is to live in a place over a long period of time. And the Wilfs have lived in this home since 1970, when they moved in when their kids were very small. And the Schenkmans move in 1999. And so they're sort of, almost Aravistes, in the kind of town, and I'm sure this exists, in this part of the country, in the part of country that I live in on the East Coast, in Connecticut, Westchester, sort of suburbs of New York City. There are these towns that become their personality keeps on changing. They were working class towns. Then they morph into sort of aspirational suburbia. The old houses get torn down, McMansions get built, home gyms are suddenly, an outdoor, it's this range of sort of humanity that are all sharing this place, this sort of slice of life at this particular, during this time in history. And so Ben Wilf and Waldo Schenkman become unlikely friends, and they have a powerful bond for reasons that we come to understand. They're my favorite characters. I was the mother of an 11-year-old when I was writing Waldo, and was very inside the mind of 11-year-old boys. And Ben just came to me sort of fully formed. And this is actually a strange aside, because I just find it so mysterious. And I don't know if any of you have read my memoir, Inheritance. So I created the character of Ben Wilf 15 years ago. 7 years later, I discovered that my dad who raised me and who I adored was not my biological father. And I ended up meeting the man who is my biological father. And basically, he's Ben Wilf. Right, right, right. So what do you do with that? I don't know what you do with that, except that it felt like this. I didn't even, anyone reading this book who's read Inheritance would think that I based the character of Ben Wilf on my biological father. I did not. They have the same medical specialty. They look alike. They have the same temperament, very even keeled, very trustworthy, but also a little bit natural reticence. So, and then when I continued to write the book and I finished it, it never once occurred to me. I didn't think about that at all because this character already existed for me. And it wasn't until I finished the manuscript and I gave it to my son, who's one of my first readers, and he read it and he said, "My God, he's just like him." And he said my biological father's name. And it was just, it was as if I conjured these characters and then they had to live in the drawer for all those years. And then I had to live all that life in order to be able to sort of meet them where they were.
Okay, good segue into how like incredibly connected and like cosmic this book actually is. That's amazing. And one of the things that really struck me about this book is how so I was kind of in a reading slump when I read this book, and I don't know, man, this just pulled me right out of it because there are so many beautiful like almost otherworldly passages in it. And I feel like that story you just told and this book maybe speaks to, I'm guessing, a philosophy you have about like time and interconnectedness. And I was wondering if you would read two paragraphs that they appear later in the book, but they won't spoil it. We cleared this earlier. But they're like a shining light on sort of the strangeness of that story you just told and the strange interconnectedness of like all the souls in this book. So read.
What page is it on? Do you know?
Can't you read my mind? I think it's 197.
Okay. He leans his head back. This is Waldo. He leans his head back. The iPad is in his lap, but he doesn't touch it. Not now. There is life inside the tree. Something, someone, a girl. Her energy field is all around him. Gossamer threads weave them together. She is around his age, but she is also every age, a newborn baby, a grown woman, a crone. The threads shimmer and dance. He once, he once saw a photograph comparing the pattern of rings inside a tree with the pattern of a human fingerprint. The two images looked almost exactly the same. It was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. Who is the girl in the magic tree? She lost her life here, he realizes. Something to do with the wound, the scar. Has she been here all along, presiding over the neighborhood? Has she watched him grow up across the street? The sky is nearly dark. Above him, the first stars. A light goes on in the upstairs guest room where his mother now spends most of her time. He watches as a shadow moves across the window and knows she's going to die. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She won't be at his high school graduation. She won't drop him off at college. She won't be there to tell him how special he is, to wait, just wait, that great things are in store. He wraps his arms around himself. Once his mom is gone, how will he know where to find her? He wishes he could ask the girl. She is casting threads in every direction, like electromagnetic waves, infrared photons, radiant beams of light visible only in the darkness. The waves grow longer and longer, and suddenly Waldo realizes she's extending her reach beyond Division Street, past Avalon, across highways, overpasses, cities, farmland. There are a few people who will feel her touch, a chill up a spine, a hand in the air, a poem recalled, even if they won't exactly know it.
Good night, everybody. That was so stunning. I had to close the book after I read that. And I feel like that you left your readers open in a book that's in some ways straightforwardly realistic fiction. You allow for this sort of radiance, and I'm just like an etherealness that I marveled at throughout the book. It doesn't come up that often, and because that would be too much, but it's there and it sort of weaves its way through the book. And I don't know, I don't really have a question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I love that, because I mean, that was it was very clear to me that, I mean, that's Waldo, and he's the magic in the book. In a way, he's the conduit, and he's the one who also is able to be of solace in a way to others, because of this sense that he has, and also what he's seen and some experiences that he's had of that sense of interconnection, of interconnectedness. And I would say part of that, and to go back to Ben Wilf and my biological father, my dad who raised me, whenever I think about him, whenever I talk about him, I feel this energy, and I always have. And it's kind of just this unmistakable thing. What is it? I don't know. I don't have any hard theories, or or anything resembling answers. I have a lot of questions. But I think that Waldo ends up embodying, encapsulating some of this sense that I've had of the ways in which we are connected to one another in these mysterious ways, and we often don't know why. Why do we sometimes meet someone and think, I know you? What is that? Why do we sometimes meet someone and think, I'm going to stay away from you? What is that? What is in, this, we might call it chemistry, we might call it mirror neurons. But I'd say the closest thing to a philosophy I have about it is that, it's scientific, which is, once energy is created, it cannot be destroyed. So where does it go? And that, when Waldo referred to the wound and the scar in the tree, there was something magical that I heard about during the time that I was writing Signal Fires. We have an apple tree on our property, and it shouldn't be alive. I mean, you can see through it. You could put your arm all the way through its trunk, but it's thriving and it bears fruit. And we had a tree guy come and look at the tree to see what we, if there's anything we need to do to continue to, help it along. And he ran his hands over the trunk, and there was this smooth spot in the trunk, and he said, this is called wound wood. And it's a place where the tree was wounded at some point, either struck by lightning or something happened, and it grew stronger in that place. And it was such a beautiful metaphor. I didn't know I was going to use it. I mean, in fact, my husband, who had a pretty serious cancer diagnosis a number of years earlier and had recovered, he went and got a tattoo, and he got that tree as his tattoo. So, I definitely felt it as this kind of metaphor in our lives for being strengthened in this way. But it made its way into the novel because when Waldo feels this smooth spot, that's the place where the Buick had crashed into the tree. And meanwhile, generations of kids in this neighborhood had grown up having no idea that anything tragic had ever happened there. They referred to the tree as the magic tree. And the whole idea of, when something happens in a place, does it stay in the place? Does it remain there in some way? Do we walk sort of blindly past, just slivers of, history that have happened in place? I've always been interested in that. And so I was really like wanting to explore that through the way that Waldo thought about it.
Well, it's beautiful. I just looked at my watch and I realized I'm being selfish, but I do have one more question and then is that okay? And then we'll take questions from the audience. Okay, so there's a Jewishness to the book. I think most of the characters, if not all of them, are Jewish. And I just wondered if that was like just a reflection of, you know, the community we're writing about or your community, or if you had if there's a deeper sense of like a worldview to those characters that you wanted to sort of hone in on, or you could talk about
No,
that.
that's great. I'm so glad you asked me that. I wanted to write a novel in which the characters were Jewish, that wasn't sort of necessarily pointing toward, it was almost a political act in a certain way, like pointing toward being a Jewish novel. There's Jewish characters and they live in this neighborhood, and their shared history is a Jewish shared history. When Sarah comes home to see her father for the first time, she's thinking about, that's the bush where Noah Kantrowitz, threw up the night of his bar mitzvah. And that's that's where, I mean, the families are, the families are Jewish. It's a Jewish neighborhood that also, I think, changes over time. And not during the years that are central to Signal Fires, but in my imagination in later years, it morphs and it becomes, different ethnicities move into the neighborhood as happens in neighborhoods. But in the 1970s, in a bedroom community of New York City, these neighborhoods tended to be pretty non-diverse. And I was interested in that because I've certainly written books that are very Jewish in their thematic material, and this I just wanted to be like, this is the world. We don't need to make more of it than that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Especially now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I have so many more questions, but anybody? I'll repeat the questions so that they are loud enough to be on the recording. So please.
Over time. So okay, thank you. Because without that push, I probably would have discovered a lot of things.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, talk about worlds colliding, right? And the things that we don't know. And I actually think that if not for the discovery that I made and the secret that was kept, and really the worlds colliding, you are worlds colliding, right? I am worlds colliding. I think if not for that, I don't think I would have found this novel. Again, it played into my thinking about the ways in which we are connected without knowing what connects us. So thank you. Yeah. Oh, I'm with you there. Yes. Thanks. And I'm glad you came. I think the podcast Family Secrets has deepened my understanding of the ways in which family secrets are both all unique, to really, misquote Tolstoy, in their own way. And yet they really do all have a kind of deep commonality. And what they have in common is that there's almost always shame. And, I think shame is probably the most pervasive negative human emotion that there is. I don't think anyone escapes it. I remember once I was teaching a large retreat, and I looked out, I was giving writing prompts, and I looked out at the gathered, there were a couple hundred people, and it was the last morning of the retreat. And I said, I'm going to ask you to do something now. You have 3 minutes. I want you to write, and no one's going to see what you're writing. You can burn it afterwards. You can rip it up. No one will see it. I want you to write the thing that if anyone knew about you, you would be so mortified you would die of shame. Okay, go. And the really revelatory thing from where I sat was I looked out at everybody and nobody was sitting there going, shame, shame, mortification. No, everybody started writing. It was just, and the thing that I felt afterwards when I was driving home is I thought, I mean, I would never ever do this, but what if I had said, you know, just kidding, you all need to read these out loud now? I would never, there would have been a stampede, but what would have happened? What would have happened is that everyone would have started crying. Everyone would have been nodding their heads. Everyone would have been saying, yeah, me too. Or, gosh, that's what you've been holding on to that, you know, oh, honey, you know, and that's all been such a revelation for me. And that's been true for years, but I think these deep conversations that I've been having on family secrets, where really every time in one way or another, no matter how different the secrets are, I mean, they aren't all about DNA surprises. They're about many, many different kinds of secrets, but there always is this undercurrent of, I don't want anybody to know this because I don't want anybody to know me. And I think the knowability, and that also really plays into signal fires as well, because there are different kinds of secrets in this book. There's the secret that the whole Wilf family keeps, but there's also, in a way with the Schenkmans, it's a different kind of secret. It's a more subtle secret. It's the, I can't let you know me. And there's such loneliness in that. If we can't let ourselves be known because we're afraid that somehow that will create a kind of rejection or vulnerability that we're not prepared for. So all that really has very much played into my writing life. But, the irony is that I've always been writing about family secrets. From the time that I was a baby writer, I've been writing about family secrets. I just didn't know why. Her name is Joanna Rakoff, and I did not. And in fact, I almost didn't publish that episode because I felt that it was really raw. My producers convinced me that it wasn't too raw, and Joanna loves that episode. But I felt a little bit like, wow, she's writing a book about that. I mean, she will eventually publish a memoir about that story. It's an incredibly haunting story. But no, I never thought about it. I mean, all it really had in common was teenagers and car. The nature of it and how that secret was held by that family was a very different story. So it never entered my mind. I think every community has a tragedy like that in it. And I think one of the things that's powerful about Joanna's story is that that particular community was haunted by that tragedy for years and years and years, and she grew up never knowing it. I mean, never knowing that had happened. But when just a quick story, because if you have more questions, I want to answer them. But when we first moved to our town in northwestern Connecticut, right around the time we moved, and my son was 3, there was an accident and a boy was killed on black ice. His car hit a utility pole, and the whole town was grieving. And we had just moved there, so we were just really witnesses to this. And every day, the route that I would take to drive my little boy to school was on the road where this happened. And every day, I would see the mother, and she would sit by the utility pole, and she had a folding chair. And she basically she was her vigil, and she planted wildflowers, and she decorated it with tinsel during the holidays. And it was so incredibly haunting and so painful to see. And the years went by, and she continued to do that for a number of years. And I continued driving that road for, all the years until my son graduated from that school. And at one point, I realized she wasn't there anymore. And there's never been a day that I drive past that utility pole and I don't think of that, just never. But the realization that I had was eventually the utility pole just went back to looking like every other utility pole. She stopped planting things and it just went back to what it had been. And that this whole generations of parents with their young children were driving their children to school, singing, the wheels on the bus go round and round, and not, did they, where did that live? And I think that was an impetus for signal fires, and certainly for the magic tree. That was something that I came to realize probably after I finished it, because I don't know if you feel this way as a novelist, but I'm the last to know. Usually, like, people point, or I think like, oh, that must have played into it. But I also know sometimes, like when you asked me that question, like, I know that didn't play into it, but I can sometimes think, oh, well, that really did haunt me, that the slow disappearance of any witness to that tragedy.
So I forgot to repeat the other ones, but the question is, how did you find the poem at the beginning of the book?
So it's a funny story, actually. So I was on Twitter, which is never a good sign. It means I'm not having a good writing day. It means I've succumbed to distraction. There's a popular hashtag among writers on like literary Twitter, which is #amwriting. And every time I see it, I think, no, you're not. I'm not either. I actually once wrote an essay called #amwriting about how distracting the internet can be. But there I was, and there was the poet, the Ukrainian American poet Ilya Kaminsky, is a big tweeter. Strangely enough, I mean, some poets are really good tweeters, and he had tweeted to the whole community saying, what poems and stories and books really do interesting things with memory. And because it was Ilya Kaminsky and I admire his work, and because I'm very interested in memory, I went down the rabbit hole and I started looking at the thread. And not that far down was this Carolyn Forche poem called Morning. And I love Carolyn's work, and I wasn't familiar with that poem, and I started reading it. And I'll just read you the epigraph, because as soon as I read it, and as soon as I saw that phrase, I didn't have a title. I mean, and I was nearly finished with the book, and I didn't have a title. Its file name in my computer was Magic Novel. I just didn't have a title. And so this was what I came across. For if the earth is a camp and the sea an ossuary of souls, light your signal fires. Wherever you find yourselves, come the morning, launch your boats. And I just, that was it. Yeah. So thank you, Twitter. Well, I love hearing that. And it's also, it takes what it takes. Books take, I remember my podcast producer, when I was first starting out, saying, how long should a podcast be? And he said, as long as a piece of string. And I just loved that. So I think novels need to be as long as, maybe they're not string, maybe they're rope, or, yeah, but it just takes what it takes. And some books take, 15 years and 1 year, like this one, and others take, are like, I mean, I've never had a lightning fast one. I don't know about you, but yeah, I'd love one of those. Yeah. Sure. Actually, funny, I was going to ask you about this. There's a poster back in your office of a novel that came out a long time ago that I had not read. And when I was signing books, when I was signing Signal Fires in a warehouse in Maryland, one of the reps pushed this book into my hands and said, I give this book to every single author who comes down here to sign books. And it's Peter Heller's Dog Stars. And I'm almost finished with it right now. It is Dog Stars. And it's Lauren's editor, Jenny Jackson, also is Peter Heller's editor. It's such a beautiful book, and I had never read him. So that's one. And another recent book that I would recommend is a novel called Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark, that I just think it's a beautiful, rich, almost sort of 19th century novel about female friendship. And the two main characters are women who have been friends all their lives, and they're now in their 80s, but it's the story of their entire lives together. And it both really has a plot. You really want to know what happened, but also is just lyrical and beautifully written. Fellowship Point. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to think of you out in the kayak reading. I mean, that's just little, reading little snippets of still writing. That's beautiful.
One copy is still writing. And there's another one somewhere in the store that I can't find.
And you know what else? Grove Atlantic is publishing a 10th anniversary edition in January.